My name is Audrey Wilson. I'm 34 years old, and last Monday I lost everything I thought defined me. Until that morning, I was the marketing director at Preston and Shaw, one of the most prestigious firms in Connecticut. People envied me, the house in the suburbs, the luxury dinners, the polished career path. I was the woman who always had her life together, or at least that's what everyone believed. But within 24 hours, I discovered that image was nothing more than glass. And glass, when it shatters, cuts deep. When they called me into the meeting, I already felt something was off. HR sat there stiffly, and Martin Davis, my new supervisor, wouldn't even look me in the eye. They spoke in rehearsed tones about restructuring and budget cuts. I almost laughed because I knew what it really was. Martin had been sabotaging me for months, rewriting my presentations, intercepting my client emails, undermining me in meetings. And now he had the gall to sit across from me and pretend this was nothing personal. They slid a folder across the table, said I needed to clear my office immediately, and a security guard stood by the door like I was some kind of criminal. 7 years. 7 years of 60-hour weeks of sacrificed vacations, of birthdays and anniversaries I missed because I thought building a legacy mattered. And in 10 minutes, it was gone. They even locked me out of my computer before I'd packed my things. As I carried that cardboard box, my awards, my framed photos, even the little plant I'd kept alive on my desk, the walk past my colleagues felt endless. No one looked me in the eye. No one spoke. Their silence hurt more than the firing itself. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, staring at the steering wheel. I wanted to scream, to cry, but I just sat there numb. I told myself Richard, my husband, would be the one person to understand. That maybe, just maybe, this blow would draw us closer. He'd hold me, remind me that I was more than a job title. That was the fantasy I clung to on the drive home. But when I pulled into the driveway at 11:30 a.m., his car was already there. That should have been my first warning. Richard never came home early. The second warning was his jacket on the stairs, tossed carelessly when he was usually meticulous. I called his name, my voice hopeful, fragile. Richard. Something happened at work, but the house was too quiet except for faint sounds upstairs. The bedroom door was ajar. I pushed it open and froze. Richard was buttoning his shirt, hair disheveled. The shower was running, and on the nightstand his phone buzzed with a message. Jessica. Who's Jessica? I whispered, even though I already knew. His face twisted instantly from shock to anger. Why are you snooping? Why aren't you at work? I just got fired, I said flatly. Answer me. And then she walked out. A girl barely mid-20s, wrapped in my bathrobe. My bathrobe. The sight burned into me like acid. You must be Jessica, I said, my voice calm in a way that scared even me. Richard sneered. This wouldn't have happened if you'd been a real wife instead of a career-obsessed robot. 6 months, he admitted with no remorse. 6 months of lies, of excuses about late meetings and client dinners. I told them both to get out. My hands shook, but my voice was steel. Richard laughed in my face. Get out, I pay half the mortgage. What will you do now, Audrey? Daddy's little girl without a job. And then he spit at me. Warm, vile, humiliating. My husband. The man I had once believed was my partner. He grabbed his suitcase, took Jessica's hand, and walked out of my house as if I were the one trespassing. I hadn't even wiped my cheek when my phone rang. My father's name lit up the screen. I let it ring, but the text followed almost immediately. Come to the house, now. So I drove, tears blurring the road. Maybe he would comfort me. Maybe I'd walk into my parents' mansion and for once hear him say, It's okay, Audrey, we'll figure this out. But the moment I stepped into his study, I saw the disappointment already etched into his face. Henry Wilson. My father. The man who had drilled into me that second place meant failure. The man whose approval I had chased my entire life looked me dead in the eye and said, You lost your job. You lost your marriage. What does that tell you about your priorities? Pack your bags. Failures don't belong in this family. Those words carved into me deeper than Richard's betrayal, deeper than Preston and Shaw's dismissal. Because my father wasn't just rejecting me, he was erasing me. I stood frozen in his study, the mahogany walls pressing in on me like a cage. My father's words echoed, each one a knife. Failures don't belong in this family. I wanted to scream that I had given everything to make him proud, that I had spent years twisting myself into shapes he demanded, chasing the approval he dangled just out of reach. But the way he looked at me, cold final, told me nothing I said would matter. "I'm your daughter," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Don't you care that I lost everything in one day?" His lip curled with disdain. "You lost everything because you were arrogant enough to think you could have it all. A husband, a career, respect. You should have chosen stability. Instead, you chose ambition. And look where it got you." I wanted him to stop, but he didn't. He pressed harder the way he always had, grinding me into the dirt until there was no fight left. "Your brothers are building something. They understand responsibility. You're just a disappointment. If you want sympathy, call a friend. Don't come here expecting handouts." I felt my knees weaken, but I refused to let them buckle in front of him. I walked out of that house without another word, each step heavier than the last. My mother was in the foyer, wringing her hands. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, but said nothing. Nothing. Just as she had all my life, watching from the sidelines while he carved me into pieces. That silence hurt worse than his condemnation. By the time I got back to my empty home, the numbness had set in. The bed was stripped, Richard's cologne still clinging to the sheets he'd shared with her. I wandered the rooms like a ghost, the walls closing in on me. I opened the fridge and laughed bitterly at the sight of the champagne bottle I'd bought for New Year's now mocking me from the shelf. Celebration, hope, all of it felt like a cruel joke. The phone buzzed with messages I couldn't bring myself to read. Richard's name flashed on the screen, but I ignored it. I knew exactly what he'd say, that I drove him away, that I wasn't enough, that I deserved this. My father's words had already planted that poison deep inside me. That night I collapsed onto the couch and finally let the tears come. They tore out of me, years of swallowed grief flooding like a dam had burst. I screamed into the dark, screamed until my throat was raw. I asked questions that had no answers. Why me? Why wasn't I enough? Why is love always conditional? I woke the next morning to silence, the kind that feels heavier than sound. My body ached from crying. For a moment, I thought about staying in that silence forever, letting it swallow me whole. But then I saw the plant I'd brought home from my office sitting by the window. It was small, fragile, but still alive. I remembered how it had survived my carelessness, how I once nearly killed it by forgetting to water it for weeks. Yet here it was, stubbornly green. Something inside me stirred. A whisper, "Not yet." I dragged myself into the shower, letting the water burn against my skin, washing away the humiliation, the spit, the rejection. When I caught my reflection in the mirror afterward, I barely recognized myself. My eyes were swollen, my face pale, but there was something fierce glinting beneath it all. That day I made a list, not of revenge, at least not yet, but of survival. Find a new job, rebuild my savings, cut Richard out of my life completely. And maybe, just maybe, prove my father wrong. But fate has a cruel way of twisting our plans. Because 2 weeks later at a networking event, I almost skipped, I stumbled into a conversation that would change everything. A conversation that would set me on a path, not just to rebuild, but to uncover secrets buried deep in my family. Secrets that would make my father's words come back to haunt him. Type continue to receive the next part. "You said continue," ChatGPT said. It was a rainy Thursday night when I forced myself to attend that networking mixer. I almost didn't go. My confidence was in shreds. My resume felt like a useless relic, and I couldn't bear the thought of facing polished professionals who still had everything intact. But something in me, that stubborn flicker of survival, pushed me out the door. The hotel ballroom buzzed with chatter and clinking glasses. I stood near the edge holding a seltzer, trying not to feel invisible. That's when I overheard two men behind me talking about an upcoming bid for a major healthcare contract. Their voices carried weight, the kind of certainty that comes from power. I turned slightly and recognized one of them immediately, Daniel Mercer, a venture capitalist who had invested in several rising tech firms. Summoning courage. I didn't feel I introduced myself. He looked at me curiously, his eyes sharp. Audrey Wilson. Weren't you with Preston and Shaw? The word stung, but I forced a smile. I was. Until recently. Instead of dismissing me, he tilted his head. Interesting. I've heard your campaigns were some of the strongest they had. What happened? For the first time, I told the truth. Not the polished half-truth. Not the lie to save face. I told him about Martin's sabotage, about being pushed out despite my record. I expected pity or polite indifference, but instead Daniel's eyes narrowed with interest. Sounds like you know how to fight dirty politics, he said. I could use someone like you. That night, he offered me a consulting contract. It wasn't much, but it was a lifeline. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of purpose ignite. As I threw myself into the work, I began to realize something startling. My father's company, Wilson Industries, was one of the firms circling the same healthcare contract Daniel's clients were targeting. It was like fate had drawn me straight into the battlefield my father had always claimed I didn't belong to. At first, I tried to ignore the connection. I told myself it was coincidence that I didn't need to drag family into this. But the more research I did, the more cracks I saw in Wilson Industries' foundation. Old deals that smelled of corruption, partnerships with shadowy suppliers, and whispers quiet but persistent that my brothers were hiding something. Late one night, buried in documents, I found it. A series of shell companies all tied back to Wilson Industries funneling money through offshore accounts. My heart pounded as I traced the paper trail. It wasn't just bad business, it was fraud. Fraud on a scale that could destroy the Wilson name forever. For hours, I sat staring at the evidence, my mind a storm. Part of me wanted to bury it, to walk away before I got pulled into something that could consume me. But another part, the part that still bled from my father's rejection, whispered louder. This is your chance. Your revenge. Your justice. The next time I met Daniel, I slid the folder across the table. He flipped through the documents, his eyes widening. Audrey, this could bring Wilson Industries down. I know, I said quietly. My voice didn't shake. Why show this to me, he asked. I met his gaze, fire burning in my chest. Because I'm done being their failure. They made me an outsider. Now they'll learn what happens when you cast someone out. From that night forward, everything changed. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was plotting, building, preparing to strike back at the father who had erased me, the husband who had betrayed me, the family who had laughed at my pain. But what I didn't realize then was that uncovering their corruption would also force me to confront secrets far darker than I ever imagined, secrets that had been buried for decades, waiting to destroy us all. The deeper I dug, the more tangled the web became. Each document, each bank record, each contract whispered a story of betrayal that stretched back years. It wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping or a few shady deals. Wilson Industries had built entire pillars of its empire on deceit. Offshore accounts in the Caymans, phantom suppliers charging millions for goods that never existed, donations to political campaigns funneled through shell companies. But what cut deepest was the discovery of a name I hadn't expected to see, my mother's. Buried in the records, I found signatures in her delicate cursive authorizing transfers that linked directly to fraudulent accounts. My chest tightened as I stared at the papers. My mother, the woman who had stood silently in the foyer while my father banished me, was not just complicit. She was a part of it. I wanted to deny it, to believe she'd been forced or manipulated, but the trail was too clear. She wasn't just standing by. She was helping hold up the rotten beams of the house my father built. One night, unable to hold the weight alone, I called Daniel. My voice shook as I told him. He was quiet for a long time before saying, "Audrey, this goes deeper than we thought. If we bring this to light, it won't just be your father and brothers who fall. It could destroy your entire family's name." I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my face. They already destroyed me. Maybe it's time they taste what they served. But vengeance, I learned quickly, is never clean. The more I prepared to strike, the more memories surfaced. Christmas mornings, my mother's soft lullabies, my brothers chasing me in the yard. I hated them for their silence, for their cruelty, for their arrogance. But they were still my blood, and that conflict tore at me every night. Then came the night my father called me. I hadn't heard his voice since the day he cast me out. His tone was clipped, commanding, as if nothing had happened. "Come to the house tomorrow. We need to talk." I almost laughed. "We..." But something in his tone, tight, almost fearful, made me pause. I agreed. Not because I owed him anything, but because I needed to see what he knew. When I arrived, the house felt different. Not grand and suffocating, but tense, like the walls themselves were bracing for impact. My father was waiting in his study, the same place where he had once called me a failure. This time, though, the fire in his eyes was dimmed. "Someone's leaking information," he said without preamble. "Documents, deals, we're being watched." He leaned forward, his voice low. "Was it you?" I held his gaze, every muscle in my body taut. Would it matter if it was? For the first time in my life, I saw fear flicker across his face. Real fear. And in that moment, I realized the man who had always towered over me was not invincible. He was breakable. "You don't understand," he said, his voice dropping. "If this comes out, it won't just ruin the business. It will destroy this family." I almost smiled, bitter and sharp. What family? The one that threw me out like trash. The one that chose silence over love. His jaw clenched, but his eyes pleaded in a way I had never seen. "There are things you don't know, Audrey. Things I kept from you to protect you." The word protect nearly made me choke. Protect. He had humiliated me, abandoned me, erased me. Yet something in his tone told me this wasn't just another excuse. There was something darker beneath it all, something he was terrified to reveal. I leaned closer, my voice steady. "Then tell me, because I swear if you don't, I will burn this empire down brick by brick." He exhaled long and ragged. "Fine," he said. "But once you hear it, you'll understand why this family is built on secrets, and why betrayal runs deeper than you ever imagined." My heart pounded as I waited for him to continue, unaware that the secret he was about to reveal would not only change how I saw him, but would force me to question everything I thought I knew about my own life. He stared at me as if deciding whether the words would cut him as much as they might cut me. The study seemed to shrink until it was just the two of us and the slow tick of a clock that had once measured my childhood in seconds of approval and disapproval. "There are things I never told you because I thought ignorance would keep you safe," he began, voice rough and small, in a way that made my stomach lurch. "Your grandfather didn't build this company on honest deals. He made arrangements, shortcuts people don't talk about at dinner. I kept those arrangements going because I thought they kept this family fed." I blinked, the sentences registering like blows I hadn't expected. "So you lied to me my whole life. You fed me a story of merit and sacrifice while the truth was, what, theft?" The words tasted like metal in my mouth. I had spent my life scrubbing and polishing my resume, proving myself on merit because that was the only currency my father seemed to accept. To learn that his currency might have been counterfeit felt like betrayal multiplied. He swallowed. "It started small. A supplier who overbilled here, a discreet donation there to grease a contract. Then it became a ritual. People who couldn't be found on paper were paid anyway. When things got rough in the 70s and 80s, those payments kept the company alive. I thought I was protecting everyone. Your grandfather thought he was protecting a legacy." "You protected it by stealing it," I said. "By laundering money through shell firms, by pretending suppliers existed when they didn't. That's not protection. That's criminal." My voice rose despite myself. Anger flared hot and immediate, less for the money than for the template of compromise he had handed down to my brothers, and by extension to me. He had not only taught us to value success, he had taught us to accept any means to it. His wrists trembled on the desk. "It's not that simple. When things fell apart this year, when Martin started shaking loose, people panicked. I did things I'm not proud of to keep windows closed. I thought if no one knew, then no one would be hurt. I was wrong." The admission was small, but in it was the crack of a barrier I'd been trying to force open for years. Here was the man who had been an immovable object admitting to rot. "And Mom?" I asked. My voice had curled into a snarl. My mother's handwriting on those transfers had been a discovery that felt like salt in a wound. "How does she fit into your protection plan?" He flinched at my tone, as if my words had reached a place he'd been protecting from himself. "Elaine wanted out years ago," he said quietly. "But she never had the courage to walk alone. When she started helping, I thought she was complicit because she agreed. Later, I realized she was trapped by small kindnesses and fear. I blamed myself for dragging her into it. The portrait of my family that filled my childhood home. My father in his suit making hard choices. My mother tending the china with gentle hands, shattered into something more complicated. A mosaic of survival fear and moral compromise. Part of me wanted to lunge across the desk and shake him until confessions spilled from him like loose coins. Part of me wanted to curl into the corner and weep for the child who had believed her parents' promises and been lied to instead. You expect me to just… What? Forgive you because you say you were trying to protect us? I asked. The room felt like too much air and not enough. You told my brothers they were heirs to something noble. You told me I wasn't cut out for the family business because I didn't understand responsibility. All that while you were hiding this. His face creased, and for the first time I saw something like shame pool behind his eyes. I wanted to tell you once, he said years ago, but I convinced myself you were safer in the dark. I thought your ambition would make you a target. I was trying to keep you from harm by keeping you blind. He laughed softly, a sound like someone who had been awake for a very long time. How stupid that sounds now. Stupid that. I sat back, the leather of the chair creaking under me. The revelation should have felt like victory proof that their pedestal was rotten proof that the world that had spat me out might be complicit. Instead, I felt a hollowing that ran deeper. Knowing the truth about their hands in the dirt didn't automatically make the pain recede. It added layers. My father was not simply a villain. He was a man who had made terrible bargains and expected his children to live within them. My mother was both a betrayer and a victim. My brothers, where did they stand? My mind scrambled over every memory, searching for the moment when complicity had turned into conspiracy. You want me to help you fix this, he said, suddenly the sentence an ugly bargain. You found the documents. You know what's at stake. We need to contain this. We need to make it go away before investigators start asking questions. His eyes were blunt and direct, and in them I read panic rather than contrition. He was asking me to join him in keeping the house upright, to become the protector he had pretended to be. The offer sat between us like poison. I thought of my grandfather's letter to me. Independence is the greatest form of security, and felt its echo in the hollow that had opened under my feet. I could help him hide the rot patch, the leaks protect my brothers and mother from the ruin he feared. I could tuck the truth back under the rug and keep the family name from shattering. Or I could walk out with the knowledge in my pocket and let the world decide whether their legacy lived or died on its merits. The decision felt like a crossroads with stakes beyond me. If I helped him, I preserved a family that had already shown me the cost of protection lies intimidation, a life built on unstable foundations. If I exposed them, I risked destroying relationships, harming people who may be less culpable than my anger felt, and stepping into a life where my father's shame would be public and possibly lethal to the family's survival. Either path promised loss. I closed my eyes, breathed, and for the first time that day listened to the quiet inside myself that wasn't shaped by my father's expectations. It was small and steady like that stubborn plant by my window. I won't help you hide crimes, I said finally. My voice was low but unshakable. But I also won't be the one to tear this family apart to satisfy my revenge. Do what you must to come clean, or I will let the truth speak on its own. He stared at me, incredulous, angry, and maybe for the first time, afraid. You would expose us, he whispered. I would expose the truth I corrected, and I would hold accountable whoever committed crimes not for vengeance, but for justice. It felt like stepping off a cliff and discovering I could fall, yes, but also that I might land somewhere honest. He breathed in sharply, finally looking very small in the space he had once filled with thunder. If that's your choice, he said, then we are at war. He looked at me as if I had just pulled a detonator from my pocket. For a long, loaded breath, the study was silent except for the tick of the old clock, as if the house itself was holding its judgment. Then my father rose and paced once, twice the practiced cadence of a man who had always believed movement could outrun consequence. "You don't understand what this will do," he said finally, voice small and frantic. "If investigators find out, people will go to prison. Jobs will be lost. Our name, your name will be ruined. Do you want that on your conscience?" The question landed like a thrown stone rippling outward. People would suffer. Innocent employees might lose pensions. My mother, shaky as she'd been, might be humiliated beyond repair. The thought of that pain stung in a way my righteous fury had not accounted for. I had imagined a clean, cinematic reckoning. Truth revealed villains toppled me, standing vindicated. Real life, as it turned out, was knotted with collateral damage I couldn't ignore. "You made your choices," I said. "You asked me to choose between covering up and letting the truth speak. I chose the truth." The words felt both brittle and liberating. My father's face crumpled in a way I'd never seen, shame finally unmasked. He sank back into his chair like someone who'd been winded, then reached blindly for an argument that might keep him in power. "We can handle this internally. Paybacks, restructuring, quiet settlements. Keep the auditors from digging deeper." "And who pays for that silence?" I shot back. "You, by pretending everything's fine while the people at the bottom keep getting exploited." "No. I won't be complicit in that calculus." I told him about Daniel, about the folder of documents, about the offshore trails winding like veins across spreadsheets. I told him I had already spoken to a journalist I trusted, not to spill for spectacle, but because I needed an independent investigator who would follow the facts where they led. His face drained of color. "You went to the press." "I told one person I corrected. One reputable person. And I gave him only what I had to prove the story was real. I didn't leak for revenge. I leaked because I want the truth handled fairly." It felt important to carve out the moral line between retribution and justice. I needed him to see it the way I did, even if he never would. He tried bargaining pleas for mercy, offers to cut a check, promises to step down if I agreed to keep things private. He even invoked families, saying how the world would judge us and how bad press could kill relationships that had survived decades. When he mentioned the family, I felt something like pity for the man who still believed his name could protect him from consequence. But pity didn't erase what had been done. I pictured the employees whose pensions had been redirected, the clients whose trust had been bought and sold. My chest tightened with grief I'd never given voice to before. That night I called my lawyer Diane and laid everything out. She listened without flinching, then told me bluntly what I already suspected. Once the papers hit the right desk, the machinery of investigation would whirl, subpoenas would fly, and lives would be rearranged. "You're doing the right thing," she said, but her voice held the weary register of someone who had seen how messy right could be. "We'll need to be meticulous. We can't let them claim harassment or revenge. Document everything, preserve emails, get your evidence to a trusted reporter, or turn it over to regulatory authorities. But be prepared, this will get ugly." Prepared or not, I moved. I archived copies of everything. I had labeled folders with dates, names, and sums. Zoe helped me compile the emails she'd saved. Daniel connected me with a journalist he'd used before, a woman named Vanessa, who had a reputation for surgical precision and ethical reporting. I met Vanessa in a cafe 3 days later, slid a folder across the table, and watched as her posture changed from polite curiosity to the sharpened attention of someone who understood gravity. She read quietly, then closed the folder and met my eyes. "This is solid," she said. "Not performative. This could stand up. But it needs context, voices, documents, corroboration." "Then find it," I told her. "Find the rest. Follow it. I want it out, but I want it handled cleanly. No sensationalism." She nodded and asked me the question I had been asking myself at every turn. "Are you ready for what this will do to your family?" It was the same echo of my father's appeal, only stripped of his selfishness. I didn't answer immediately. I thought of my mother, gentle and complicit, of my brothers who had been raised in the system I was about to expose. I thought of the plant on my windowsill, small, stubborn, alive, and how it had survived neglect and returned green the day I watered it. I thought of the people who had reached out to me after my firing, Zoe, Sarah, Megan. people whose livelihoods and dignity I wanted protected as much as I wanted truth. Yes, I said finally, I am ready. The truth tasted like iron and rain at once. It would come with jagged edges. It would hurt. But if there was any chance that exposing this rot could prevent another woman from being shoved into a cardboard box, or another employee from being stripped of dignity, then it was a cost I was willing to bear. Back at home alone in the beach house that had become refuge and headquarters, I sat at my desk and drafted the first email to Vanessa. My hands were steady. I attached the files, the spreadsheets, the backups Zoe had handed me, and a note. This is everything I have. Please look closely. For justice, not revenge. I hit send and felt a calm settle that surprised me. It wasn't triumph. It was the quiet before work that mattered, coordinating legal counsel, preparing statements, thinking through what would come next. Within 48 hours, the journalist's preliminary inquiry had prompted an internal audit at Wilson Industries and a legal notice sent to my father's lawyers. The world was tightening its focus on a house that had always seemed invulnerable. News outlets called with questions, and for the first time since my life imploded, people listened when I spoke. Some offered condolences, others whispered of scandal. My brothers called their voices formal, brittle with panic disguised as command. We need to handle this privately, Vincent said. For the family. I stared at the phone thumb hovering over decline. The decision I had made was already unfurling consequences I could never fully predict. I picked up and let them talk. I would listen, I would respond, and I would keep walking forward. There was no going back now. Vincent's voice was sharp, each word clipped like he was trying to contain a fire already raging out of control. Audrey, you don't understand what you've started. The press is circling, regulators are sniffing. Do you really want to drag the family name through the mud? I let him speak, his desperation dripping through the phone line. Then Gregory's voice cut in lower, steadier, but no less defensive. Think about Mom. Think about how this will crush her. If you care about anyone but yourself, you'll drop this. Their words might have pierced me once, but not now. I took a slow breath. You're both grown men. If you made choices that broke the law, then you live with them. I didn't force your signatures onto fraudulent accounts. Silence stretched on the line, then Vincent snapped. You're not a saint, Audrey. Don't act like you've never compromised to get ahead. The accusation stung, not because it was true, but because I had spent my whole life trying not to cut corners, trying to prove myself the hard way in a family that sneered at effort. I kept my voice steady. I may not be a saint, but I won't be a criminal. Not for you. Not for him. Not for anyone. I hung up before either could respond, my hands trembling. That night I couldn't sleep. I paced the living room of my tiny beach house, the waves outside crashing like they carried messages I couldn't decode. My phone buzzed with texts from numbers I didn't recognize, threats, bribes, pleas. It was clear the machine my father built was fighting back. 2 days later, Vanessa called. Her voice carried both excitement and caution. Audrey, I've corroborated half the documents with public records and anonymous sources inside Wilson Industries. What you've uncovered is just the beginning. There are offshore accounts linked to political kickbacks, and she paused, her tone shifting, funds tied to real estate developments in your name. The words hit like ice water. What are you talking about? I've never touched those accounts. I believe you, Vanessa said, but the documents suggest someone funneled money under your identity. If this goes public, you won't just be a whistleblower. You'll be a target. My knees buckled and I sat hard on the couch. The betrayal spread like poison through my veins. They hadn't just cast me out, they'd used me. My own name, my own identity folded into their crimes, so if the truth ever surfaced, I'd drown with them. For hours I sat in silence, staring at the evidence Vanessa had sent over. My mother's signature, my brother's authorizations, and my name forged in contracts I'd never seen. A scapegoat dressed in my skin. That night, when sleep finally came, it was broken by a dream of my father's voice whispering, "Failures don't belong in this family." Only this time I answered back, "Neither do cowards." By dawn, something inside me had shifted. This was no longer just about survival or even revenge. This was about reclaiming the truth of who I was and ripping back the mask of the family that had used me as both shield and sacrifice. I called Vanessa. "Print it," I said. My voice didn't tremble. Every word, every document. If my name is in there, the world deserves to know who put it there. There was silence, then a quiet respect in her tone. You understand this will explode. I want it to, I whispered, because I've lived my whole life under their shadow. It's time the world sees where the darkness really came from. When the article dropped a week later, the world tilted on its axis. Headlines blared across business journals, political columns, even mainstream news. Wilson Empire built on fraudulent deals. Millions funneled through shell companies. Daughter implicated in paper trail of lies. Phones rang, stocks plummeted, cameras swarmed outside the Wilson estate. And me, I stood in the doorway of my beach house watching the tide roll in, my name splashed across headlines. My truth was tangled in their lies, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. Because now the battle was no longer hidden in boardrooms or whispered in studies. Now it was in the open and I was ready to fight. The morning the article went live, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Old colleagues, strangers, even people I hadn't spoken to since college were flooding my inbox. Some messages carried sympathy, others venom. But one thread tied them all together. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The headlines were brutal: Wilson Empire crumbles under fraud allegations, and my face was plastered alongside my father's and brother's. They called me the whistleblower, the traitor, the scapegoat. Depending on which outlet you read, I was either a hero or a villain. I walked to the shoreline that afternoon, the waves curling around my ankles, the salt air biting my skin. For the first time in months, I let the sound of the ocean steady me. No boardroom, no family judgment, no husband's betrayal, just me and the relentless tide reminding me that even empires fall, but the sea endures. By evening, the fallout had begun in earnest. Federal agents raided Wilson Industries headquarters. My brothers were subpoenaed. My mother, pale and shaken, was photographed leaving the mansion with her face hidden behind sunglasses. And my father, Henry Wilson, the titan who had once called me a failure, was arrested. The image of him in handcuffs flashed across every screen. I watched it in silence, my chest tight with something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't even relief. It was grief. Grief for the girl I had once been, who had spent her whole life trying to earn love from a man who never knew how to give it. 2 nights later, my mother showed up at my beach house. She looked smaller, diminished, her hands trembling as she clutched a scarf around her neck. "I didn't know they used your name," she whispered, her eyes wet. "I signed things I didn't understand because I thought I was helping your father." "I'm so sorry, Audrey." I wanted to hate her, to rage at her silence, her complicity, the way she'd let me burn alone for years. But when I saw the raw regret in her eyes, all I could feel was exhaustion. "I needed you to fight for me," I said softly. "And you never did." She broke then, sobbing in my arms, the weight of decades spilling out. For the first time, I let her grief mix with mine. Not forgiveness, at least not yet, but a start. Weeks passed. Investigations deepened. Friends fell away afraid of the scandal, but others stepped closer. Daniel stood by me. Vanessa continued her reporting with integrity, and Zoe, sweet, loyal. Zoe became my anchor. Slowly, I began to see a life forming beyond the wreckage. I found work consulting for startups, guiding young women, trying to carve their own space in industries that still doubted them. Emma, my niece, wrote me an email from college telling me she admired my courage. "You showed me we don't have to accept silence as love," she wrote. That single line made every sleepless night worth it. And as for Richard, he tried to crawl back once the headlines painted me as powerful again. I deleted his message without reading it. Some doors once closed should never be opened. Looking back now, I see that my father was right about one thing: failure doesn't belong in this family. But not in the way he meant. The true failure wasn't me losing a job or a marriage. The failure was theirs, choosing pride over truth, power over love. I carry scars, yes, but I also carry something stronger: the knowledge that I survived the fire they built around me and walked out alive. If you're watching this, maybe you felt invisible in your own family, or betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect you. I want you to know this: you are not the sum of their judgment. You are the sum of your resilience. So if my story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to fight to be seen for who you truly are? Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's living fully honestly and without apology.